It all started with something simple. The lake, that wide stretch of shimmering blue water, had been my reason for moving into this neighborhood in the first place. I could see it from my back porch, hear the waves on quiet nights, and imagine summers filled with fishing, swimming, and kayaking. But the moment I tried to use it, the HOA stepped in like they owned the entire horizon. They waved papers at me, claimed rules were rules, and told me that access to the lake was restricted. Imagine paying thousands every year to live next to paradise, only to be told you couldn't dip a toe in it without permission. It wasn't just frustrating, it was insulting, and it planted a seed in me, a seed of rebellion. For weeks, I tried playing by their game. I attended the HOA meetings, asked politely, filled out the so-called requests for access, and even offered to pay additional fees if that was the real issue. But every time, the board, led by Margaret, the self-declared queen of the HOA, shot me down with that smug little smile. She told me things like, "The lake is a shared resource, not your personal playground." Yet somehow, her family was out there every weekend, boating, barbecuing, and swimming without a care in the world. That double standard was what broke me. I wasn't just being excluded, I was being mocked. And when they finally sent me a warning letter, saying that even walking near the lake would result in fines, something inside me snapped. If they wanted to block me from the water fine, I'd just bring the water to me, and to everyone else. At first, it was just a joke in my head. What if I built my own lake? But as I sat there, staring out at the land the HOA so jealously guarded, the thought twisted into something bolder, bigger, crazier. What if I built a water park? Not just a kiddie slide or a blow-up pool. I'm talking a full-on, sprawling, splash-filled wonderland. It sounded insane, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The HOA claimed they controlled the lake. Fine, but the patch of empty land they technically managed, but never used, well, I knew the legal boundaries better than they thought. I knew exactly which areas were under common use, meaning they belonged to all of us homeowners, not just Margaret and her cronies. That was my loophole. That was my battlefield. The project started small, blueprints sketched on napkins, calls to contractors who thought I was out of my mind, and a few late-night trips to the hardware store. But then it snowballed. Inflatable slides, massive sprinklers, above-ground pools linked together like a lazy river, and even a rented snow cone machine. Neighbors noticed the trucks rolling in, and whispers spread like wildfire. Some thought I was crazy. Others thought I was brilliant. Kids started showing up just to watch the construction, their faces pressed against the fence in awe. Every hammer swing, every splash of paint, felt like a victory against the suffocating grip of the HOA. By the time the final touches were added, a towering water slide visible from half the neighborhood, I knew this wasn't just a project anymore. It was a statement. The first day I opened the gates was pure madness. Families poured in, laughter echoed through the air, and water sprayed in every direction. It wasn't just a park, it was freedom in liquid form. The HOA board stormed over within minutes, clipboards in hand, barking about violations and unauthorized use of property. But here's the thing. I had done my homework. I had the legal documents printed, laminated, and ready. Every inch of land I built on was designated for communal use, and as a homeowner, I had as much right to it as anyone else. Margaret's face turned redder than a sunburn when I read the bylaws out loud in front of everyone. The crowd cheered, kids splashed harder, and the HOA's authority crumbled a little more with every passing second. Instead of shutting me down, the water park became the center of the community. Families who had felt isolated under the HOA's constant watch finally had a place to gather, laugh, and be free. Cookouts lined the edges, music played, and for the first time in years, neighbors actually acted like neighbors. Even people who had once sided with Margaret began to drift toward the fun, realizing that joy was louder than control. Of course, the HOA didn't give up quietly. They tried sending fines, threatening lawsuits, even calling the police. But every time, the officers showed up, saw nothing illegal happening, and left shaking their heads. The HOA was losing not just their grip, but their relevance. The breaking point came when Margaret herself marched into the park, bullhorn in hand, demanding everyone leave. But instead of silence, she was met with boos, laughter, and splashes of water. Someone even handed her a snow cone, which she smacked to the ground in fury. That was her mistake. Cameras were rolling, neighbors were watching, and her tantrum spread online faster than she could scream violation. The HOA board fractured soon after, members resigning, residents demanding new leadership, and Margaret retreating into the shadows. My little act of rebellion had grown into a revolution. Looking back, I realized the water park wasn't just about access to the lake. It was about something bigger. It was about proving that power only exists if people let it. That joy, freedom, and community are stronger than fear and rules written in ink. Even now, long after the slides have come down and the sprinklers have rusted, the spirit remains. The lake is open, the HOA is reformed, and the neighborhood is alive again. And every time I hear kids laughing by the water, I smile. Because I know the truth. Sometimes, the best way to fight back isn't with anger or lawsuits, it's with fun. And fun will always win. The weeks after the water park incident felt surreal. The HOA, once this looming shadow over every decision, every lawn ornament, every swing set, suddenly seemed powerless. For years, people had whispered their frustrations in hushed tones, scared of fines, penalties, or social shaming. But now, after seeing what we built together, the silence broke. Neighbors started repainting their homes the colors they had always wanted. Families planted gardens without fear of letters showing up in their mailboxes. Kids began leaving their bikes out overnight without their parents worrying about warnings. It wasn't just about water slides. It was about breaking the spell the HOA had cast over us. That single act of defiance had sparked something irreversible courage. When the HOA finally lost its grip, the first thing we did was reclaim the lake. For the first time, it wasn't just reserved for a chosen few or wrapped up in red tape. We cleared the shorelines, built small docks, and set up community barbecues by the water. It transformed from a guarded, forbidden jewel into the beating heart of the neighborhood. Families fished together, teens held bonfire nights, and every summer, kids raced into the water as though it had always been theirs. It struck me then, this was never about ownership, but about belonging. The lake didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to the people who lived, breathed, and built their lives around it. And in reclaiming it, we reclaimed part of ourselves. And then there was Margaret. For so long, she had ruled with a clipboard and a glare, acting as though she were the guardian of all things proper. But the water park, and the movement it ignited, shattered her illusion of authority. People no longer flinched when she walked by. They no longer cowered when her letters arrived. Instead, they laughed at the memory of her storming through the water park, bullhorn in hand, dripping with melted snow cone syrup. Her name became less of a threat and more of a punchline. Eventually, she stopped showing her face at meetings. Some said she moved away. Others said she still lived in her house, curtains always drawn. Whatever the truth, Margaret was no longer a ruler. She was just another neighbor, stripped of her crown. With the HOA reformed under new leadership, the neighborhood began to flourish in ways none of us had imagined. Instead of rules and punishments, the new board focused on collaboration and celebration. Monthly potlucks replaced tense meetings. Volunteer projects replaced fines. We built a playground together, started a community garden, and even hosted summer festivals by the lake. The water park may have been temporary, but it left behind a permanent blueprint, a reminder that joy is contagious and unity is stronger than control. Sometimes I'd sit back and just watch the families gathering, thinking about how close we came to losing all of this to a handful of people who thought power was their birthright. For me personally, the water park was more than just an act of defiance. It was a turning point. It taught me that sometimes, when you're pushed into a corner, the best response isn't to fight harder, but to think bigger, to create something so bold, so undeniable, that the walls of control crumble on their own. I used to think of myself as just one homeowner among many, powerless against the machinery of rules and fines. But now I see myself, and all of us, differently. We are more than signatures on a deed or numbers on a street. We are a community, and when we stand together, no board, no bylaw, no Margaret can hold us back. Even today, long after the water slides have been taken down, the echoes remain. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I walk by the spot where the park once stood. I can almost hear the laughter, the splashes, the cheers of victory when we defied the HOA. The grass has grown back. The land looks ordinary again, but I know better. That place will forever be sacred ground, not because of what it physically was, but because of what it symbolized: rebellion, unity, and joy. And every time I pass the lake, alive with children's voices and families gathering, I know it was worth it. Because the truth is simple: fun didn't just win the battle, it won the war. When the dust settled and life returned to its natural rhythm, I began to notice something subtle but powerful. The HOA no longer haunted my thoughts. For years, every morning started with dread. Would there be another letter? Another fine? Another confrontation? But now mornings were quiet, peaceful. The only thing in my mailbox was the usual clutter of bills and flyers. The absence of fear felt strange at first, like walking without a weight you didn't even realize you'd been carrying. It wasn't just a victory against rules on paper. It was freedom in the deepest sense. The neighborhood had shed its chains, and in that stillness, I understood the beauty of what we had reclaimed. It was the kids who carried the torch forward. Long after the water slides had deflated and the sprinklers had been put away, they still talked about the summer of the water park. To them, it wasn't just a season. It was a story, a legend that they would one day tell their own children. I'd watch them run by the lake, chasing each other with water guns or skipping stones across the ripples, and I could see it in their eyes. Freedom had left its mark. They had grown up knowing what it looked like to stand together, to laugh in the face of control, to choose joy over fear. And in that way, the water park would never really vanish. It had written itself into their childhoods, permanent and untouchable. Something else changed too: our bonds as neighbors. Before, people lived in isolation, separated not by fences, but by fear. The HOA had turned us against one another, making us suspicious, cautious, hesitant to connect. But after the water park, those barriers broke down. Suddenly, barbecues became common. Families shared tools, recipes, even childcare. If a house needed repairs, half the block showed up to help. We were no longer just residents of the same neighborhood. We were a family, forged in the fire of rebellion and cooled in the waters of our victory. That sense of connection, that unspoken trust, was perhaps the greatest treasure we had won. As for Margaret, the former queen of control, her downfall was slow, but absolute. The image of her storming through the water park with her bullhorn lived on as the neighborhood's favorite inside joke. Memes were made, stories exaggerated, but the truth remained. Her reign was over. She tried once to rally support, to remind people of the order she claimed to have brought, but her words fell flat. No one wanted order anymore. They wanted freedom, laughter, and life. Eventually, Margaret faded from the public eye. Whether she moved away or simply retreated into silence, no one knew for sure. But one thing was clear. Her crown had shattered, and no one would ever piece it back together again. One summer, not long after the park had been dismantled, the community decided to celebrate our new life with something bigger, a festival by the lake. There were food stalls, music, games for the kids, and fireworks that lit up the night sky. As I stood there, watching the reflections shimmer on the water, I realized how far we'd come. This wasn't just about having fun. It was about reclaiming joy from the jaws of oppression. The festival became an annual tradition, a living reminder that the water park had been more than a stunt. It had been the spark of a revolution. And every year, when the fireworks boomed, people whispered the same thing. This all started with one act of defiance. Word of what we had done didn't stay within our neighborhood. Friends, relatives, and even strangers from other communities heard the story of how we had stood up to our HOA. Some laughed in disbelief, others applauded with envy, but many took it as inspiration. I began receiving messages from people across the state asking how we did it, how we managed to turn control into community. Some even started their own acts of rebellion, creating gardens, building playgrounds, or organizing events without approval. It struck me then, the water park wasn't just a rebellion here. It was a spark carried by the wind, igniting courage in places I'd never even see. For me, the journey left scars, but also wisdom. I learned that standing up doesn't always mean shouting the loudest or fighting the hardest. Sometimes, it means creating something beautiful where ugliness once stood. It means showing people that another way is possible, one filled with laughter instead of fear. I also learned that leadership isn't about authority. It's about service. When I built the water park, I wasn't trying to lead anyone. But in creating a space for joy, I unknowingly became a symbol of resistance. And that realization stays with me to this day. Power is fragile, but joy is indestructible. The patch of land where the water park once stood looks ordinary now, just grass and dirt, blending with the rest of the neighborhood. But for those of us who lived through it, it will never be just land. It is a symbol, a marker of where fear was broken and freedom was born. Sometimes, I see kids playing tag there, running across the grass, without realizing the history beneath their feet. Other times, I see older neighbors pause and smile at the spot, their eyes heavy with memory. To outsiders, it's just a field. To us, it's sacred ground. And so, I hold on to one truth. Rebellion doesn't have to end in bitterness or anger. Sometimes, the greatest rebellions end in laughter, in unity, in joy that refuses to die. The water park was never just slides, sprinklers, and pools. It was an eternal flame, a reminder that control can only win if people forget their power. And every time I see the lake shining in the sun, families gathered around it without fear, I know that flame still burns. Quietly, steadily, forever. Time has a way of softening the sharpest battles, but not this one. This fight, this stand, this strange, beautiful rebellion. It left a ripple that refuses to fade. Even when the laughter has quieted, even when the grass has grown high where slides once towered, the memory of what we built lingers in every heart that lived it. The lake is more than water now. It's a living monument, a mirror that reflects back not just our faces, but our defiance, our unity, our joy. And whenever the sun sets over it, painting gold across the surface, I am reminded that we were not just resisting rules. We were writing a story that will outlast them. A story where ordinary people proved that no board, no bylaw, no false crown can ever cage the human spirit. So this is where the story ends, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with peace. The water park may be gone, the laughter may have shifted into new forms, But the legacy remains, etched deeper than any rulebook could reach. We were told we couldn't, and so we did. We were told to obey, and so we created. And in the end, that act of joy outlived every attempt to silence it. When future generations walk these paths, dip their toes into the lake, or gather under the fireworks of our summer festivals, they won't remember the HOA's rules. They'll remember the summer when a neighborhood dared to dream, dared to laugh, dared to be free. And that, above all, is the legacy worth leaving behind.